Welcome, everyone. So just before we start, welcome to our monthly webinars, the ECOP Wednesdays. And before we start, just a reminder of our housekeeping rules that you know of already. Please make sure that your name is clearly entered so that we know who you are. You can put your organization if you want. You will be invited to speak during the second part, but in the meantime, just keep your microphone muted. And if you want to speak later on, just raise your hands. You can also use the chat, obviously, during the whole webinar to comment and ask questions. Just make it your space. And obviously, please keep your questions and your language respectful. So a bit about us. We are the ECOP, the Early Career Ocean Professional Network of the European Marine Board. The European Marine Board is a think tank linking marine sciences and policies. It's made of 39, I think now, 39 organizations across Europe. And we are the early careers of all of these organizations. This network has been established and is now managed by the European Marine Board Young Ambassadors in the Secretariat. I'm Juliette, I'm one of the Young Ambassadors. And you can apply if you want to the ambassadorship. The call will be open in February, and I will leave you my seat. So the role of the network is to connect us to each other, to connect ECOPs, but also to gain a voice inside of the European Marine Board in what the EMB is doing, and in more widely in European institutions. In terms of activities, we just had our first forum, and the goal was to provide training to ECOPs, but also to have brainstorming sessions on what we want to engage more in policy spaces and to make sure that this message gets communicated. And we also have this webinar series. If you want to present your work, and in general, if you want to reach out to us for anything, you have our email address and our Twitter account on this slide. We also want to invite you to present yourself and present your work in our launching format, the Meet Our ECOP series. We will be sharing, as you can see with an example of me, I will be sharing about our ECOPs, about what we do, about what we're good at, and about the collaboration opportunities that we're looking for. So if you want to be featured on our social media and website, you can fill just this form using the QR code. And now, digging in our today's topic, we will have Morgane presenting her experience as a young early career scientist engaging in science policy society interfaces. So first, Marie will be presenting about her experience, and then we'll have a second part where you will be invited to share your experiences, to ask questions. And so a bit about you, Marie. You are a PhD student working on spatial conservation for mobile bird species in the Atlantic Ocean. You are also a very active member of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network that you will tell us about. And this talk is a bit special for me because I have to say that since I know you, you have been a model, not only to remind me how we early career scientists can produce important and solid knowledge, but also to show that we can join these policy spaces, that we can participate and be confident, but also that we can do all of that while being open and curious and kind, and looking forward to build stuff together, even if sometimes we get angry. And you know, Marie, I've been to conferences with you, and sometimes I feel like, oh, I've heard that talk before, or it's not relevant, and I'm just going to do that email that I need to do. And Marie will always be that person looking and listening at everything and taking notes and grabbing the speaker at the end. To have a conversation and a connection. So I'm really looking up to you, and it's with great pleasure that I'm leaving you the floor.
Thank you so much, Juliette. It's a very, very kind introduction. So hopefully I can share some of my experience, and I'm very happy to have this conversation with you all. I think we all have a role to play and we can build things together. So thanks so much for the introduction. Thanks so much for giving me the space. And I will share with you a few thoughts and experience I've learned through my engagement in science policy interfaces. But first of all, I would like to ask you what you think are science policy society interfaces. How do you see yourself in it? What do you think they are? Do you have any examples? And to do that, I will just ask you to go on this website. I think we can put the link in the chat and have a little go on what you think they are. Do you have any example in mind? Yes, what are they for you? So you can go to booklab.com and put this code, or you can just go use this QR code or use the link. And you can put up some words of where you think science policy society interface are, and if you're not sure, just thinking what could be some of them, just names or things like that. Yes, we have a big policy brief coming up. Policy making, sciences, places, powerful. I like this. Relying less. EMB, yes, European Marine Board coming up. Yes, scientists, farmers, yes, it's not only about science, not only about policy, it's also about society, organizations, fishers as well, connecting. Yes, this is, I think, a good summary of what science policy interfaces can be. Yes, and just coming back to it, I think a short definition. You can still see my screen properly, right? I changed screen, but it's still working. Yes, okay, cool. Thanks. So science policy society interfaces are spaces where scientists, but also other knowledge holders, policymakers, government representatives, civil society, and basically all stakeholders that you can imagine and are interested, come, exchange ideas, try to build trust and share knowledge to take decisions that can guide policy making. There are many examples from the local to the international. I haven't seen so many examples in what you proposed, but it's okay. I will talk about a few, and then we have other opportunity to see a few more examples today. And I would like just to know, so going back to the book lab slides, if any of you have already participated in a science policy and society interface, and if you've participated, if you haven't, would you like to? And if so, why? So we have three questions. The first one is, have you ever participated in a science policy interface? So we are getting... It's about half for now. A bit more yes. Okay, so we have 8 people who answered. Just giving one more minute. Okay, so it's about, yeah, a bit more than half that have already participated in Science Policy Society Interface and others not. So for those of you who have, please just keep your experiences in mind. And at the end of the presentation, I would like that we have a discussion, that you tell us a bit of your experience, in which Science Policy Society Interface you've participated, and what you thought were barriers or what you thought were positive things that came out of it. So just like keep that in your mind, and we'll come back to it at the end. And if you haven't, or if you have and have another opportunity, would you like to participate again in a Science Policy Interface? Okay, well, I guess you came to the webinar, so you were mostly interested in it. So, okay, not surprising, but it's good to know that there is interest, and young people and young scientists as well are interested to participate. And then what makes you want to engage with Science Policy Society Interfaces? Just put up a few words that you think why they're important. Yes, because I want my science to matter. I think that's inspire and change, management, to make our work meaningful, make a difference. Yeah, these are very good reasons, I think. Applying sciences, improve decisions, we need that as well a lot. Communicate science, contribute to a good change, yeah. Engaging stakeholders. Yeah, thanks so much for your contributions. Helping decisions maker to navigate climate change. Yeah, so it's a lot about bringing science to policy. So most of us are early career researchers. Some people do it for joy. This is beautiful. we need optimism and positive thinking. But yes, so I was exactly like you. I wanted to bring my science to decision makers, but also I wanted to contribute, bring changes, and that's how I started. So I had this interest of making things matter and making things impactful. And I started a master's thesis in 2019 with BirdLife International, which is an NGO working with birds. And my subject was to identify important foraging areas for Antarctic penguins. And they coverage primary and protected areas. And that was my first interaction with the Science Policy Society Interface, which was the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. And the idea of the project was very applied, was very much about bringing science to policy. And we identified these areas, and then we wrote a report that we gave to the expert committee that went to the conventions and presented this result to decision makers. So I was lucky that I got in a situation where the setup was already existing, so I could easily bring science to policy. I wasn't the one bringing it. I was doing the science, writing the report, but someone in the NGO went and other experts presented the information. That's also the first time that I started hearing about bigger Science Policy Society interfaces, which were the HICIS Treaty, which is the treaty that has been negotiated for the past 20 years and was agreed on last year, actually this year in 2023, about conserving biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. It was also the first time that I heard about the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is the youth representative in the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And the role of GIBON is to represent youth voices in the conventions. I didn't know too much about it at the time. I was busy writing my thesis. I didn't really engage with any of it, but that was my first appearance of all these interfaces in my mind. Then I started a research contract with a EU project, which the goal was to train young scientists at the Science Policy Interface. So I had the interest. I got recruited to work on the effectiveness of marine protected areas at conserving seabirds. And this was very much very relevant for the high seas treaty, because I was working with marine species going far out in the high seas, and that would require some conservation. So there was a lot of link, and I really wanted my science to be useful for the implementation of this treaty. And then COVID came, and we were all home, and we didn't know what to do anymore. And many of these meetings and interfaces, they stopped having meeting, or things went online, and it was a bit of a blurry time, or we're not too sure what to do. And I decided I would join Gibbon. I would start engaging with youth, working for biodiversity together as a community. And at the time, it was supposed to happen the 15th conference of the party of the Convention of Biological Diversity. So the Convention of Biological Diversity is signed by almost every country in the world, except from 2. And so it's a really important international treaty that governs the way biodiversity is managed in the different at the international level, and then it has to be implemented at the national level. And at the time, there was supposed to be the 15th conference of the party, which was an important COP, because they were defining the international biodiversity action plan for the coming decade, which is under the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework, which sets out the targets and the objective to reach at the international level for biodiversity by 2030. So there was a lot of thinking, a lot of activity around this scope within Gibbon, and I had joined the European chapters because I'm from France, so it was the most relevant chapter. And at the moment, there was a lot of worldwide youth consultation going on throughout the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is a global movement of young people. So there are chapters in all continents and in many countries. And we in Europe decided to join this consultation and to do our own. And that's at this moment that I really understood the importance of gathering youth voices, and to also understand why youth were so important as a stakeholder. Why do we have to bring our voices? And I never thought, I thought of myself as a citizen, but I never thought of myself as I really have to do something to actually bring my voice there, because otherwise, I mean, if no one does it, it won't happen. And it is very important that we all realize how important we are as young people, as stakeholders. We are very legitimate. We'll have to be addressing the crisis that we are now facing, and we really have a role to play there. So in Europe, we decided to do our consultation, and we reached out to many different youth organizations to understand what their priorities for the future was. We did that. A few months later, I started being in the coordination team of the European chapter, and there was something I was really caring about was the ocean. And with a few other youth organizations, we decided to try to have more youth participation in the high seas treaty negotiations. At the time, it wasn't finished, and so we created the BBNJ, so the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Youth Network. This didn't really work out so well. It worked out very well for a few months, and then not so well. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but if you want later in the discussion, we can talk about why things don't work out sometimes. And then on the side, I was not only a young person starting to engage really in the science policy society interfaces, but I was also continuing my project. And COVID, yes, basically I spent the first project in COVID, so nothing much happened. And then I started my PhD also on the conservation of Atlantic highly mobile seabirds. This was relevant again for the High Seas Treaty. My science, I thought, was relevant for the High Seas Treaty, but also for the Convention on Migratory Species, because a lot of these birds are migratory but are not listed within the convention, which is a convention to protect migratory species internationally. So there was all these interfaces that started to appear here and there. So what I did when I started my PhD, it was called the big year for the ocean. It was 2022. And we had a lot of ocean meetings happening. So the first one I engaged with was the One Ocean Summit. So this was decided by the French government to hold a summit to bring together people from researchers, but also companies, industries, policymakers, all together to talk about the ocean and to build momentum for ocean conservation, because the High Seas Treaty was being negotiated, the Convention on Biological Diversity at its meeting coming up. Also in climate, the ocean was starting to rise in international negotiations. So in this moment, I joined a group of early career marine researchers, and we from all different fields in ocean sciences, and we brought together recommendations for decision makers that we went to present in a stand in the summit, and also by asking questions during the presentation. So this was very interesting, and also to exchange with other fellows, early career researchers was super interesting. I did realize that people knew already a lot, so it wasn't not doing science wasn't enough. They actually knew the policymakers, they knew some of these messages as well, but there was a lot of advocacy to make this more compelling. And then we continued with the same group, and we went to the UN Ocean Conference. So this took place in June 2022. And it was the same. We had the opportunity to present our recommendations in side events and to participate in different events. So when you have this big conference that happen, you have a lot of official events, official debates, official conferences, and you have a lot of side events where you bring different people, a lot of NGOs, civil society, companies. They hold a lot of events, and everyone is trying to interact and build collaboration and build partnerships. So, but at that time, I also ended up going to the UN Ocean Conference with a second hat, which was a representative for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, because everyone else from Gibbon was attending a very important technical meeting for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I was in the Ocean Conference, and I was very much focusing on marine issues. So I ended up bringing youth priorities in the official side events of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and meeting delegation, trying to show how youth priorities were aligned with the ocean, with the conservation of biodiversity. And this was a new experience, but very, very enriching to meet all these people. Because I came with the two hats, I also realized that being an early career researcher did not always grant me more weight than just being a young person. And that's when I thought that maybe it didn't really matter too much how I was engaging, whether it's from the science point or whether it's from the youth advocacy point more. But what mattered was what the message we could bring and what we could change. And a few months later, I applied to go to the COP15 as part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in the delegation. And I was helping coordinate the French-speaking delegation, and also linking the French-speaking delegation with the policy side of the negotiation, also focusing on marine issues. Just because I think it's interesting to know what we do at the COP. I'll just make a small parenthesis and tell you what's happening really when you go to a conference of the parties of a big UN convention. So our aim, after all the consultation that we did worldwide through the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, we came up with the key 3 priorities. So these were intergenerational equity, transformative education, and right-based approaches for people and nature. These were very broad, but then on all the texts that were being negotiated, we were basically trying to transfer these priorities into the text. And so we had specific text recommendation through all the text that was being drafted and proposed for the post 2020, so the Global Biodiversity Framework, the document that came out of the COP. So we had different teams. We had the coordination, policy and lobbying, the youth pavilion, the side event, the communication, the actions. I'll just show you a few pictures so you can see what we're doing. Basically, we had a coordination team trying to organize all our group. We were a very big delegation. It was a very important COP, and we managed to bring almost 100 people. So that was very exceptional, and we learned a lot, and we did a lot of contacts with our national focal points to try to link young people with our national delegates as well. So the policy and lobbying, so one part of it was basically here on the right, you can see the text that is being negotiated. And we, in Gibbon, we track everything. So we take notes of everything that is being said. That's important to build our position as youth, but it's also important to understand who is our allies, who are the countries that can help us. Because we are an observer in the COP, which means we can speak if we are given the floor. If a negotiator, if the chair of the session gives us the opportunity to speak, we can speak. But then if we want what we propose to be incorporated into the text, we need champion countries. So we need countries that will support what we say and agree to put it into the final text. So that's important to understand who is aligning with our vision and who we should try to reach out to, how we should try to communicate with them. And then we had a lot of meetings. So in the European chapter, we met the EU representative, the member of the European Parliament, also that had interest on biodiversity. And we also met, well, in my case, the French delegation, but each delegate from Gibbon was trying to reach out to their national delegation. And it was very important because we built very strong contact that really helped us when we came back from the COP to change things at the national level. We also had a lot of communication. When you're young, you bring attention. It's through, and the media are really, they really want to speak with you, which is a bit a double sword. So you need to know how to, to interact with the media. And I wasn't so much involved with it, but we had like a press release, and we had young people very, very talented to communicate, to bring the message to the people outside of the venue, to everyone else that was trying to follow what was happening at the COP. And also we had actions. So Gibbon co-organized a big march with the other civil society organizations that brought together 3,000 people. It was amazing because it was minus 15 degrees Celsius, and still so many people came. So it was in Montreal, sorry. Yeah, so we had a big march, and then during the COP we had different actions. So here the sign said 3 days left, still 700 brackets. Basically all the text that is being negotiated but it's not agreed is put into brackets, and that means there is still a lot of negotiations to do. So it was a stressing period where there was not so much happening. We could see that there was a lot of discussion still to be done, and so we organized this kind of action. We also had events at the youth pavilion, also for building partnership, but also to explain what we're doing, what all the different chapters in the world are doing. We had side event. We had, before the COP, we had a youth summit where we brought together indigenous youth, but also local youth from Canada and young people from our delegation all together, and we shared practices and we shared what we're doing, and it was a very good way to build capacity among us. So what we achieved in this COP? For the 3 priorities, I'm just giving you 3 short examples. There's more, but I don't want to throw you into all the details of the text. But basically, we managed to have the principle of intergenerational equity in the consideration for the implementation of the framework, which is basically a section at the beginning of the framework that states out which are the important conditions for the framework to be realized. So this was very important for us to have the words of intergenerational equity dimension of future generations and the meaningful participation of younger generation. It's the first time in an international agreement that we have a specific targets focusing on stakeholder engagement, which is a target 22, so it's French. And in this target, we specifically mention youth participation that should be meaningful. So this is very important for us, and we're very happy about this one. There were also transformative education that was mentioned in this consideration, and there are other parts as well where there are more details, but basically this went through. And also it was a very strong framework based. The participation also of indigenous people and local communities was very important to make it a strong framework that follows right-based approaches for human and nature, but the nature part is still not as good as it could be. But yes, we have some victories. Of course, the framework is not perfect. We know it. There are some limitations, but these were our little wins, our big wins actually from the COP. And on the marine side, which has maybe more interest for you as ECOPs, we did participate in the negotiations, which was quite impressive because we were not so many to follow the marine things, and we were quite new. So for us, it was a lot of discovery and stress, and we really wanted to be as useful as possible. And we did manage to include women and youth in the paragraph of capacity building, which is great because before that was not there. And this is important because this means that there will be funds coming to capacity buildings, and these funds will have to be looking at women and youth in particular. So sometimes it's just small words in the text, but at some point it's going to turn into actions later on in the process. Then after the COP, a lot of things happened. We wanted to raise a lot of awareness about and communicate about what we learned. But also when we did a conference, for example, someone from IPES, the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, approached us and asked us if we wanted to review the IPES assessment on transformative change. So we started looking at that. So I don't know if you're too familiar with the IPES process, but IPES makes assessment on the state of biodiversity. And there is one currently being written about transformative change. Transformative change to basically achieve better society. So we were very interested for us. It's a big priority in GIBET. And so we reviewed the draft, and we will continue engaging and reviewing the draft. So we started accessing to other spaces where youth could be involved and wasn't so much involved as well. And then, of course, once we have an international convention and treaty, we need to come back to our countries and we need to implement it because the implementation is at the national level. However, in France, we didn't have a chapter, and it was therefore difficult to link youth officially with the government and with the governance places. So we co-funded French, Global Youth Biodiversity Network chapters, and then we were involved because we reached out to these people that we met at the COP, and also because we had a team of very motivated people to review the national biodiversity strategy of France. So we were involved in the National Biodiversity Committee. I'm not too sure how much of our comments will be taken into account, but at least we are there, we are giving our opinions, and we are hoping that we can bring some changing as well. I separated as early career researchers and youth because sometimes people don't really know how to engage as one or the other. For me, now it's the same, but I think both are important. I think we bring different things with the different hats, and yes, we can continue. So on the science side, I keep collaborating on research that I think can inform policy and collaborate for advocacy. I'm not the one doing the advocacy. So I've been working, for example, on collaborating, not leading, but collaborating on understanding the seabird exposure risk to marine plastics. This can be important for the UN Plastics Treaty that is also currently being negotiated. and also identification of marine flyways. So basically marine corridors that seabirds are using in the ocean. And this is important for migratory species. And this, for example, will be, this is all work that I do in collaboration with BirdLife International. And this work will be presented at the Convention on Migratory Species Conference of the Parties next year. And hopefully can help also better protect some of the migratory species. And then we decided that there was much more space to inform young people on how to engage with science policy interfaces, but this was not a work that someone could do by itself, because there are different perspectives to bring in. And therefore we started this collaboration with many different youth networks, among which also the European Marine Board, the ECOP network, on bringing the youth brainstorming and explaining what are the pathways, what are the achievements of youth network in science policy, society interfaces, and also what are the recommendations that we would give to young people wanting to engage, but also to other stakeholders engaging in these interfaces. So they help us break down the barriers that also exist. So these are just a few science policy society interfaces that I've been engaging with. It's not necessarily I've been the one going and participating, but I think there are many, many ways to start engaging with science policy society interfaces, being as a researcher, being as a youth activist, being a bit of both, being as we want, really. But there are lots of them, and these are just a few because there are actually many more of them, and even many more than what I put here. You have some on the UN Forum for Forests. You have the European Union, which is full of science policy society interfaces. You have the European Marine Board, which is one as well. You have the International Seabed Authority, for example, deciding on this deep seabed mining. You have the UNESCO Managed Biosphere Program, the Convention on Climate Change, and the Convention on Wetland. And there are also many ones that are much more local that are happening in the city where I live, for example. There are some here. And there are some international level. Well, it's full of them. So it's sometimes a bit difficult to find which ones we want to engage with, but it's really, yeah, a lot of opportunities. Now I've been speaking for a while, so if any of you want to share their experience, what you've learned in science policy, society interfaces, what you found as a benefit, what you found as a barrier. I'm just curious to hear what you've been experiencing as well, and also to take questions. And then I'll just have like one more slide after that for the end. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marie. It was really interesting and really nice to see your experience and how you kind of started from scratch and how you can get connected really fast and involved in many things and really still connected to your work, and you can actually bring stuff there, and that also it's improving thanks to Gibbon and more networks and more youth that are passionately involved. Just a small thing on Gibbon, you can join the global Gibbon, or you can join the different chapters. They're like the local units. Just from the website, you have a form that you can fill, and then you'll be invited to the different Telegram groups and stuff, and you can see what the activities are and what you can join. But also they have a lot of webinars to learn what the COPs are about, but also to learn specific skills like how to talk to journalists that you mentioned, or more stuff. So yeah, yes. As Marie said, now please raise your hands for any comments, any